Hello, and welcome to Overview of Transition Services. Our agenda for this particular set of PowerPoints you can see in front of you, Introduction to Transition, and so on. So we're going to be basically talking about the nuts and bolts of what transition programming is, as well as some of the concerns with fitting it into the general education curriculum. First of all, let's just think for a second how you would define transition, because that's a huge term and we find it used sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly in the realm of special education. So just think about how you would define transition. Okay, here's what IDEA tells us is the definition of transition services. And you'll notice that there are some red highlighted points that really point out key areas to understand. One is that it's a coordinated set of activities. What that means is that if it is done correctly, typically does not involve just the special education teacher, but may involve collaborating with, for example, community-based agencies, others in the school setting, definitely parents, which we're going to talk about later in this class, and anyone else who may be involved in helping to prepare this individual for post-school success. Another piece of important information is that it is a results-oriented process. Originally, when this language was crafted in IDEA, it actually said outcomes-oriented process. But because of the changes in education overall that call for accountability measures as far as what our students are achieving, we want to be able to see that our students are succeeding, be able to keep data, be able to understand what may be or may not be contributing to the levels of success that students are experiencing once they leave the school setting, and to use that as a way to evaluate our own transition programming as we are conducting it in our school. The next thing that you see in red is that it focuses on improving the academic and functional achievement. A little bit later in this particular set of PowerPoints, we're going to talk about pathways. And what this means is that we need to look at the whole student in terms of what is needed to move into post-school life and adult roles. And that may be any combination, depending on the outcomes that we're seeking for that student, any combination of academic and functional skills. So we need to look at transition programming as really expanding beyond our typical thinking of we are just there to teach academic skills, but rather that we are really looking at the entire functionality of that individual as they move into post-school roles. And then finally, I guess it's kind of repetitive, but to say that we want to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities. And below that you see some of the things that we need to be concerned about. If they're moving on to example community college or even college, whether they're going straight into vocational education or vocational training programs, whether they're going straight into employment settings, including supported employment, and whether or not they're going to be accessing any kind of adult education or services. We also need to be concerned about their independent living skills, their ability to function as independently as possible in as least restrictive a living environment as possible, and then obviously community participation, which means that they are full functioning members of society, that they can engage in full citizenship within our daily lives. And these are just things that we've just talked about, again, just to reiterate that we want to make sure that what we're talking about with transition services and all these things we're trying to accomplish really is based on the child's strengths, preferences, and interests. And we can also throw the word needs in there as well. So strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. This is a highly individualized process because post-school outcomes are not the same for every student, just as post-school outcomes were not the same for all of you. So we need to, again, make sure that we're understanding this concept of individualization in providing transition services. And Transition services must include instruction, obviously. Course of study decisions become very important for these individuals depending on what we anticipate their post-school visions are. Working with perhaps related services within the school setting to help accomplish that. Providing community experiences that allow students to generalize information from the classroom into actual implementation in community settings, and again, being able to help them develop employment and post-school adult living objectives. In other words, those daily living skills that allow them to be able to be as independent as possible. To be able um, to engage in transition programming, let's look a little bit further at this idea of coordinated set of activities. Again, specialized instruction, related services, community experiences, development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, and acquisition of daily living skills if appropriate. And you notice that says if appropriate. Different students have different needs as far as developing daily living skills. Some students may acquire those skills more easily through incidental learning and may not need as many supports in developing those skills. Other students will require direct instruction in developing what we call daily living skills, or DLS, which are the skills that we use on an everyday basis to be able to care for ourselves, to be able to maintain a home, to be able to problem solve, engage in appropriate social activities, all of those types of things. Let's look at this idea of specialized instruction. Certainly it talks about this in your text as well. But again, recognizing that this idea of individualization is extremely important. So the instruction in which we engage with these students could be primarily academic in nature, could be primarily functional, i.e. daily living skills, employment readiness skills, those types of things, or it could be a combination of the two. Again, depending on the performance levels of students and also depending largely and primarily actually on what their post-school goals are and what they need to learn to be able to effectively move into those settings. Related services within the school, we need to look at these as and perhaps in a different way as we typically do as special educators. That we know that related services mean things like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language, psychological services, just to name a few, and to look at them in relationship to building those skills that someone needs for post-school life. For example, occupational therapy may take the route of teaching some of the daily living skills and cooperating with the teacher in developing daily living skills for students. Working with a speech and language therapist may involve looking at appropriate social language for individuals, how to properly engage in conversations, how to ask for help, how to self-advocate. So we really need to, again, re-envision how we look at the idea of related services when we're helping these individuals prepare for post-school life. Again, community experiences are so invaluable. Whether they are directly out in the community or whether or not we are using community referenced instruction. Our goal should be to be able to help these individuals move from what they're learning in the classroom into actual application in community settings, helping them to understand what their recreational options are and how to access them, how to use things like banks and stores and all the things that we do on a daily basis as full citizens in our community. These things are, it's difficult to teach these in the classroom. However, using community referenced materials and definitely providing community-based experiences can help students practice and generalize those skills in real time and in real life. And development of employment and other post-school living objectives. Let's look at employment. Again, this could take several different venues. We might have someone who moves more into supported employment types of settings where they're provided short-term or long-term with a job coach. to be able to work in a workplace, in a regular competitive workplace, but receive those supports. We may have someone who needs a setting that's perhaps even a little bit more restrictive than that, although decreasing in use and popularity, the idea of what was originally called sheltered workshops, a rather antiquated term, but just the idea of that being quite a restrictive setting in which the entire work experience takes place in a non-competitive setting. And then moving all the way up to what we call competitive employment, which is what all of us enjoy. No one handed us our jobs. We needed to apply for, interview, and have the skills to be able to carry out our jobs. So again, involving this type of instruction and experiences for our students many times is critical to their accessing those environments and in setting up appropriate supports for them in those environments so that they can be successful. And then again, finally, acquisition of daily living skills, as this lovely little girl in the skeleton outfit shows. Eating, bathing, self-care, um, medical emergencies, all the things that we do on a daily basis. Now think about this. Who should receive transition services and who benefits from transition services? Are transition services essential for all students? And is it only the student who benefits from that? So just think about that for a second. You can pause if you wish, but just think about this for a second. Everyone receives transition services in some aspect or another. Even if a student is college bound, a student that we serve in special education is college bound, there are still basic skills that this student needs to learn to be able to manage time, navigate new environments, be able to ask for help, self-advocate, engage in accessing accommodations that may be provided. So the possibility of someone exiting special education services and not requiring any transition services, I just cannot even conceptualize what that might look like. And then, of course, as we have students who are moving into other settings, employment settings, vocational training settings, residential settings, all the way from supported residential settings all the way to independent living types of situations, that those transition services are going to be needed on varying levels for each student. And the same with with developing personal social skills, for example. Again, it's going to be individualized based on student needs, but these are domains of preparation: employment or post-school preparation, personal social preparation, daily living skills preparation, self-advocacy preparation, that really is critical for all students to be able to develop if we're going to help them become more successful in moving into post-school goals. And again, who benefits from these services? Well, obviously the students do. At-risk youth, many times individuals who are at risk for dropout. Part of the reason is because education is not as relevant to them, and they cannot see the usefulness of engaging in general education curriculum. So offering other curricular alternatives for them that become real life, real skill, real time types of activities actually may help them to prolong staying with us in K-12 services. Parents and guardians, this is a whole different, this is a whole topic within this class, but the family structure becomes a different type of structure once we're talking about moving an individual with disabilities in post-school life. What we're talking about is engaging in decision making that is based on a student's interests, needs, preferences, and skills, but also trying to foster an understanding, a mutual understanding, and mutual communication with that student, with the parents, as to what that should look like, and also actually helping those families move into new roles, because once this student exits K-12 services and no longer has our supports, parents become a very important conduit and support as that individual moves into adult life. So Obviously, if we are doing transition services effectively, those parents and guardians are going to benefit from our supports and teaching them about what supports are available for them as this family moves into this new dynamic. Colleges and technical schools benefit because we can send students to them that are better prepared to deal with the rigors of not only their curriculum but also all the other things that are involved, the personal, social, the daily living skills that are involved in being able to access those environments. Business and the community at large, we want to be able to prepare employable youth. We want to be able to prepare youth who are able to successfully access their community resources. And by doing that and helping them toward that full citizenship type of concept, then obviously those businesses and those communities benefit from our efforts. And finally, our nation. We can move from a system of entitlements for individuals with disabilities to actually individuals who can become wage earners, taxpayers, and really contribute to the overall value of what's going on with our nation's productivity. Now, this is a big question because we're talking about how important transition is, but one of the challenges, and it speaks to this quite a bit in your text, is how to fit this within the general education curriculum. So I want you to think for a second because we all know the pressures as teachers for accountability with academic skills, but here I am talking about community skills and pre-employment skills and all of those types of things that really don't have or appear not to have direct conveyance into what we call our general education curriculum. So just think about this for a second as we progress through the remainder of this particular set of PowerPoints. We have just all kinds of things coming at us. There's the Common Core curriculum, of course, of which Pennsylvania is part. Most states in our country are now part of that, meaning that the same set of outcomes are universal across the majority of our states. The Standards License System, which is Pennsylvania's interpretation of that. And then we also have curriculum, as is demonstrated here with Life-Centered Education, which is a transition curriculum and assessment type of tool. So, then which focuses on development of personal, social, daily living, and employability skills. So again, what may seem to be something that may be counterintuitive really needs to find a way to align for students with disabilities as we prepare them for their anticipated outcomes. Because remember that academic curriculum is not going to be most likely the only source of information and training that these individuals we serve need. We need to look at different forms of transition as we're considering the implications for curriculum. We have vertical transitions, which are, isn't this a cute little guy who's graduating from, I'm thinking probably preschool? Vertical transitions are those that that students experience all throughout their life, and of course some of those transitions start for our individuals with disabilities at birth and moving into the different types of programming that are available for infant toddlers and then early childhood, and then going into the K-12 system and beyond. So each of those types of movements will present a type of transition that is needed for that student to experience and skills that are needed to move from one setting to another. For example, just to take a subset of that, the skills that are needed to move from elementary to middle school, for example, are more than just academic. They have to do with being able to navigate a type of school day structure that is different than these children have experienced before, being able to navigate multiple classrooms, perhaps being able to having to engage with different teachers. Now we're moving into different types of social experiences as children move from elementary to middle school, and then, of course, from middle school to high school, problem solving, decision making, as the world becomes more challenging for them. So these are what we would consider vertical transitions. So we can't just view transition as something that happens at the secondary years, that it's something that we just need to plan for when this student is in high school and now we start worrying about what happens to him once he leaves school. While this is a secondary level course, uh, certainly the types of transitions that we're talking about can occur throughout that child's lifespan. And then there are horizontal transitions. These are ones that are perhaps less invasive, although they can be just as challenging. For example, moving from a less restrictive to a more restrictive setting, moving from one school to another school, having the family structure be altered and the student having to adjust to perhaps a different family dynamic. These are things that during the lifespan, even if the student is at a particular stage of development, they can experience transitions that occur in their daily lives to which they need to adjust. So again, as we're looking at what we're trying to build into the curriculum, into our services for students with disabilities, we need to recognize that there are a lot more transitions that happen than just those that we typically think of, which are transitions from the transition from high school to post-secondary settings. And again, just to reiterate, the again this idea of vertical transitions, horizontal transitions. Okay, now think about this. What would you consider to be an successful adult or a successful adult life for a student you know? And what information experiences do you think your student needs to get there? So this makes you think, for those of you who are practicing classroom teachers, or who have been practicing classroom teachers, think about, or even within your own family, think about an individual, perhaps an individual with a disability, perhaps not an individual with a disability, but think about how you would define what would be a successful adult life for that student. And think about all the information and experiences that students need to be able to get to that point. This is a very loaded question, but it makes us stop and think about our accountability as special education professionals, that it does not stop at the doors once this student exits our secondary setting, but that we need to be able uh, to do whatever we can to make sure that we have equipped this individual with the knowledge and skills to be able to move into those successful adult roles.